I can't tell you how many times someone said, my son loves to argue. He's in high school, and I'm sure he'll make a great attorney someday. And I think to myself, really? Your son loves to argue? That makes him by default a great attorney? Does he know how to argue like an attorney? Which really got me to thinking, you know what? What if in everyday life people knew how to argue like an attorney? I mean, maybe arguing like an attorney would help you not be a great attorney, but just be great in everyday life. And from that, I came up with 7 tips that you can use in everyday life to argue like attorneys argue. Number one is know the other side's goals. I mean, of course, you know your goals, they're your goals, but the other side's goals are really what you need to fixate on when you're arguing something. In law school, we were forced to read a book called Getting to Yes. And in that book, the author gives the example of two people who were fighting over a lemon. Well, how can two people have one lemon? Well, as it turns out, one party needs the zest and the other party needs the juice for respective recipes. So there is definitely a way, even though both say, I have got to have my lemon, that one can have the peel and the other can have the juice. And you would be shocked at how many times as an attorney, I'm arguing something where both people say, I've got to have the lemon, when really there is a win-win situation. But it's not my fixation on needing the lemon juice that will win me the day. It's my knowledge that the other side only needs the lemon zest. Number two, don't ever ask a question you don't want the answer to. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you get pulled over and you were going, I don't know, 10 miles over in a school zone. You should not ask that officer, officer, I guess you kind of have to give a ticket every time you pull somebody going more than 10 miles over in a speed zone. You shouldn't ask that because you're encouraging him to say, yes, I am forced to do that. That is my job. So never ask a question you don't actually want the answer to. Number three is knowing when to be quiet, knowing when to shut up. So many people think that successful arguing is knowing what to say and saying it with a lot of force. Oh no. The best legal arguers know when to be quiet. That kind of takes shape in 2 different ways. Number one, if you overshare, if you over explain, you can sink your ship. So let's say, for example, you're talking to an insurance company and you ramble on and on and on and you give all kinds of details. Well, that insurance company isn't listening for the truth. They're listening for the detail that can totally get you excluded from coverage. So you need to not over explain. Secondly, if you do over explain, especially with detail, you actually seem less credible. You know what I'm talking about. You know someone is lying when they say, oh, yeah, that day 10 years ago, I remember it perfectly. The sun was shining and there were 3 sparrows overhead. And I looked over to my left and I saw that guy outside the window just as clear as could be. You don't seem credible at all. People don't remember that level of detail that well. And so over explaining can totally sink your ship. Number four is if then logic. I remember before I went to law school, I was thinking about what undergrad degree I should have. And the career advisor says philosophy. I went, philosophy? Why philosophy? And she said, well, because philosophy teaches you logic. And I went, well, I think I'm a logical person. And she says, that's not what I mean. It's if then thinking. Have you ever heard the Rene Descartes? He's a philosopher. Have you ever heard the saying, cogito ergo sum? It means, I think, therefore I am. That is a logical if then. If I think, then I am. And when we think over and over and over again in if this must be that, if this may be that, if this, then never that. If you learn to think like that, you'll be a lot better at arguing. So if you think of any argument in that way, if this, then that, you'll organize your thoughts in a way that will help you be more successful. And number five is to research. When I'm in a courtroom and I see somebody who I know knows her stuff, she knows the code. She maybe even knows it, by memory. She knows the facts of the case. That person is going to win against the guy who kind of looks like a lazy slob and doesn't know what the contract says and doesn't know what the law says. I know it seems obvious, but I am shocked at how many times people think that, well, if I just try to speak convincingly, even though I don't know the facts or the details of this contract very well, of course I'm going to win. Well, instead of spending all your time trying to be really convincing, start by researching the facts of the case. And so if you're in a contract dispute, you're dealing with your HOA, you're dealing with your insurance company, start by knowing the contract. Number 6, when you're arguing, be organized. So I can tell an experienced attorney when he says, Your Honor, the law says 1, da 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 da, 2, da 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 da, 3, da 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 da, and can just be incredibly concise and organized about those arguments. So if you can talk as if you were talking in organized bullet points, you are far, far more convincing. I know that people think that lawyers just ramble on a lot, but actually the best lawyers are the ones who say the least. They're organized, they're succinct, they're concise, at least orally. Now, in writing, attorneys are the worst at rambling, but the most successful attorneys in a courtroom setting are the ones that have the fewest amount of words spoken. And number 7, make your point with a story or an analogy. Humans are wired for story. We're wired for analogies. Sometimes, in order to get our point across and to make sense to another human, we need to speak in the way that humans are wired, and that's through story. I'll give you an example. Have you ever seen at the O.J. Simpson trial where Johnny Cochran gets up there and says, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit? I'm probably butchering the way he said that, but you get my story, right? You get the analogy, right? So you can see how a story or an analogy that anybody can relate to is going to be more convincing. So use those stories, try to weave that into your argument. So let's just recap everything that we've talked about today and how to argue like an attorney in everyday life. Number 1, know the other side's goals. You know your goals, but knowing the other side's goals and how to reach that win-win solution is the best tactic in arguing. Number 2, don't ever ask a question you don't want the answer to. Don't ask the officer, so if I was going 10 over in a school zone, I guess you kind of have to give me a ticket, don't you? Number 3, knowing when to be quiet. Don't over-explain and get caught up in a technical detail that could sink your ship. And don't lose your credibility by oversharing a story with too much details that makes you seem like you're lying. Number 4 is get really good at if-then logic. Understand the argument. Sometimes even chart it out. Number 5 might seem obvious, but it's do your research. Don't just wing it. The best legal arguers are the ones who actually know their stuff. Number 6, get organized, be succinct. You know, as an attorney, when I'm in the courtroom and my opposing counsel says, Your Honor, the law says, number 1, this, number 2, that, number 3, this, and because of that, my client must win, I go, oh, shoot. Because that seems super credible. And lastly, tell stories. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Use story, use analogies, because that's how humans were wired. So anytime you can make your argument and somehow weave in a story that every person can relate to, an analogy, you're going to be more convincing.